science has literally discovered the first couple, our first parents, Eve, the mother of all living, Adam, the first man, in genetics. We can trace back every man to one single Y chromosome ancestor and every single human back to a single mitochondrial DNA ancestor.
Welcome to the brightest audience in the country. This is Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, Bible student, science geek, amateur comedian. We have a power-packed show lined up, one that hits right at the foundation of a biblical worldview.
That's right. So joining us is the team from a very familiar name in creation science, Standing for Truth Ministries. So I'd like to welcome Donnie and Matt to Real Science Radio.
Fred, Doug, it is an honor to be with you brothers. I appreciate all the work that your team are doing at Real Science Radio. I've watched endless of your programs and radio shows, and I really do love the way that you guys tackle the critics, tackle challenges. You're doing a great job, so it really is a privilege to be with you both tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Donnie. Matt, introduce yourself.
Yeah, guys, I'm Matt.
Hi, Matt.
I am the video editor for Standing for Truth, so that takes up all of my time when I would rather be doing other things.
Yeah.
And sometimes I force him to do debates with me and, jump in on some of these open mics that we do. As Matt knows, we just did a debate seminar on this topic, Adam and Eve. So a lot of this information is fresh on our minds, and we're excited to present that for you guys.
And so for those who don't know, Standing for Truth Ministries, they run a debate fairly regularly. I've got you on my feed, guys, and it'll pop up in a little window in this bottom like, oh, that's got to be one I got to tune into. You guys are growing. Your channel's doing really well, and it keeps getting larger. You guys have had some great debates on there. Really appreciate it. You guys are doing a ton of work. I mean, what got you started? I think Bob Enyart, didn't you interview him early on?
We did. We did years ago, 3 to 4 years ago. Wow. We had the privilege of interviewing Bob Enyart and Brian Nickel. Yeah, that was a comprehensive program. We went for a few hours on the flood and the hydroplate theory, and specifically debunked the so-called heat problem. And so we've had many guests. I think we've done over 150 interviews. I've hosted approximately 450 debates over the last 5 or 6 years. So it helps me. I feel like I'm always learning when I'm hosting or moderating a debate.
Awesome.
Well, that's what's great having you on the show, because you've got this wide knowledge of creation science because of all the interactions you're doing with the evolutionists. And, a lot of times the best way to learn the arguments is to actually engage, I hate to say it, but the enemy. You got to,
right.
I know that whenever I've got an article I've written that has to do with creation, the first people I want to review it are evolutionists, because they're going to work really hard to find something wrong with it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the vast amount of knowledge that you've gained. When you had me on your show, I was just impressed with, how much you knew about all the different arguments. So I guess today you've got, you're going to present on Adam and Eve, the scientific evidence for Adam and Eve.
Yeah, that's right, Fred. Now, and before we get into today's main topic, which, as you said, Fred, scientific evidence for Adam and Eve, and we're hoping to get to something that it has so many syllables, I may not get this right. You might have to help me. Endogenous retroviruses. Did I get that right?
You got that right. The so-called best
evidence. The so-called, I should say. Yes, well, that adds even more syllables. So-called endogenous. We hope to get to that. But you mentioned that you interviewed Bob Enyart, and I just, full disclosure, I got my first opportunity in broadcasting because I got a phone call from a show called Politically Correct in the 90s, where Bob was becoming a kind of a regular guest, and they wanted Bob on, but Bob was unfortunately otherwise engaged in prison ministry at the at the Arapahoe County Jail, which Jefferson County Jail at the time. And so the interviewer interviewed me over the phone, and I ended up getting booked on Politically Incorrect because Bob was doing jail ministry, and that's how I actually fell backwards into some sort of broadcasting career or hobby.
So for those who don't know, politically incorrect back in the day, that was Bill Maher.
Oh,
Yes, yes, now known as Real Time. With
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same, not quite the same format. He always had like 3 or 5 liberals, and then he would have on one conservative. And Bob and I were the one conservative, and we manhandled them pretty well. Although I don't know if those shows exist anymore. I know my mom has a copy.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, you're thrown into the lion's den, but that's good. So many get to hear the truth. One of my first experiences with Bob Enyart was a very long, I think 4 to 5 hour debate. I think it probably took place over a few different shows with Aaron Ra on the Phylogeny Challenge. That was a blast.
Yeah.
Yes, and Aaron Ra is still out there, and we're still hoping to have the opportunity to be the Christian that converts Aaron Ra, because that'll just be a wonderful day, and all the angels in heaven will cheer when Aaron Ra converts. That I do actually pray for that. So
He'll make a great creationist.
he would. He'd be phenomenal. Anyway, just thinking of him as a creationist, you really can't help but laugh. But we do hope that he eventually accepts the forgiveness for his sins and believes in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Aaron, don't be a fool. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. Now let's talk Adam and Eve, and let's talk about Adam and Eve. Can we start in the Bible, gentlemen?
Amen. Yes, the best place to start is the Bible. What does the Bible say? And I'll go over a few slides here. One of our favorite topics, we do like to focus on the topic of Adam, Eve, and separate ancestry. And one of many things that I love about this topic is it does answer Aaron Ra, who we were just talking about, his phylogeny challenge. Where do we draw a line in ancestry? Can we point to a biological organism that, based on the scientific data, is unrelated to any other form of life? And we've done that in humans. And we've confirmed what the Bible says through empirical scientific data. And so let's go over briefly what does the Bible say on the issue. Do we read about common ancestry in Genesis? Does the Bible give any hints at humans being related to chimpanzees and banana plants? Because that's what universal common descent would teach, that we're all related through common ancestry, both plants, animals. So you, Doug, you, Fred, and Matt, you're related to a strawberry and a mosquito according to common descent. Does the Bible teach this? Let's see. Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul.
Amen.
Genesis 2, specifically 22. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman. And so the book of Genesis, as we can see, is making several genetic statements with significant implications. What did Jesus say about the issue? Well, Matthew 19:4, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning, referring back to creation week, when he created Adam and Eve on day 6, made them male and female? Mark 10:6, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. The Bible calls Adam the first man, 1 Corinthians 15:45, and Genesis 3:20 calls Eve the mother of all living. So, gentlemen, do we see common descent? Do we see human evolution in those important passages? No. The Bible is clearly claiming there's no common ancestry between humans and any other form of life. And so the question is, does the scientific data support or confirm the Bible's teaching on human origins? The Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. So,
all right, now before we jump to science,
yes.
I just want to finish with the Bible, because there are some of our beloved Christian brothers and sisters who neglect the truth that you just revealed from the Bible, that God says he created them male and female from the beginning of the creation. When was that? Oh, the beginning of the creation. So not after even thousands of years, not millions of years, not billions of years, but at the beginning of the creation. And just one more, one of my favorites, Jesus Christ talks about the righteous blood of Abel. And he talks about Abel as a specific individual, a genuine historic individual. So for whether you're an evolutionist and you want to hear about science, we're going to get into that. But for our Christian brothers and sisters, look at what the Bible says and understand that the Bible is, it's a history book, and it's always best to take it literally unless the text makes it obvious that it's figurative. And so let's jump into the science.
Well, you nailed it, Doug. The existence of a historical Adam and Eve is essential theologically. The prophets, the New Testament authors, Jesus Christ himself refers back to these early chapters, refers back to Adam, to Eve, to Noah.
Yeah.
And so we need to take this as literal history. We interpret the Bible literarily. We understand when something is historical. And so what does the science say? And we're going to hand it to Matt to go over some of the science, but I will give just a teaser here that science has literally discovered the first couple, our first parents, Eve, the mother of all living, Adam, the first man, in genetics. We can trace back every man to one single Y-chromosome ancestor and every single human back to a single mitochondrial DNA ancestor. Matt, did you want to touch on some of that data, brother?
Oh yeah, you're right. I do. We could talk about pretty much everything that the Bible claims about these two people being literal and real, and we can deduce from every claim that's made, backing it up by science. So that's what I like. So, for example, the Bible claims that Adam was made from the dirt and the dust of the ground. So therefore, we should find those minerals in human beings, and they are inside of us. Adam was created separately from all of the animals at the very end, the pinnacle of all creation. Adam was placed in the garden, which would be an actual location. He was told to eat strictly from the fruits of the trees, all but one. He was, Adam and Eve was made from him, another perfect creation. He was told now that he could eat from a tree, and that if he did, he would start aging. Do we know what that tree is? I think we do. Adam's genetic potential for life was about 1,000 years. Another thing, can we validate this in genetics? Interesting. I think we can. Adam was then kicked out of Eden, and he was told to do what? He had now had to till the land for food. So therefore, can we validate this through science? Again, we can. And again, if he was made at the last day of creation, according to genealogies, about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, can we prove that in genetics? And all of those claims in the Bible, we can do. So take your pick.
Okay, well, you said two things that intrigued me. The first one is, and maybe I heard you wrong, correct me, I think you implied that we know what tree it was?
That's right, because of the descriptions that are mentioned outside of Scripture in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You see, what happened is when you start looking at in these different books, you start noticing that it describes things about the tree being very specific, the type of wood that's on the tree, what the fruit looks like, how it's bunched together, how it's golden in color and looks like grapes, how the smell of the fruit gives off an aroma that's very pleasing, how the shapes of the leaves are. Well, guess what? When you start looking into the plants, you can deduce where this tree is and what type of tree it actually is. I even have a video on the Standing for Truth channel. It's called The Quest for the Tree of Knowledge. And that one is where we go through a walkthrough of all of those individual things to trace us down to the actual tree.
So, guys, are you aware of Bob Enyart's take on this? He's got a video on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Actually, it's an audio. It's really interesting. I'm just curious if you guys have heard it.
I have not, no.
It's based on a story in Ezekiel, and it's really interesting how there's a parallel. You know, there's parallels drawn between, you know, the king of, I think it was Tyre, and Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and the devil. And then it gets into the king of Syria, I think, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you guys got to see it. It's so fantastic. Long story short, there was this huge tree, and evil men went to cut it down because they thought it was like sucking up all the water. And there's this idea that after the tree was cut down, and oh, by the way, it says all the branches landed on the the mountainside. And then when he's telling me this story, actually I was listening to it on audio. I'm thinking, well, this isn't in Genesis. I actually went back and I read like almost all of Genesis, and I told Bob that's not in Genesis, and I hadn't heard part 2. And the second part of it was, it's somewhere in Ezekiel, and it talks about this tree in the garden and how evil men cut it down. And we think that could have, now this is speculation, that could have been what triggered the global flood. So anyways, I was curious if you guys had heard the story, and if you haven't, you guys gotta check it out, and we'll link to it in the show. It's called
Yes,
the
please
Knowledge
do.
of Good
I'd
and
love
Evil.
to check that out, Fred.
Yes, and so Bob doesn't get into what genus or species the tree was or what type of fruit it bore, but it sounds like maybe you have a video that does get into some of that, and we probably shouldn't let the cat out of the bag here. We should probably point people to that video, including myself.
But we could. The reason why I like it so much is I went on another quest. The quest series is the series that I have that I really try to go deep down the rabbit holes on these things. And one of them was the quest for Eden. Where was the location of Eden? A lot of people think, oh, it's the Middle East. It's right there where the ark came down. That makes no sense on a global flood for the ark to float up whole year and then float right back down in the same exact position that it was created in. So where was it actually made? Like, what's going on? What is gopher wood? Like, what is all these things? So you go, what was in the Garden of Eden? It was full of all kinds of gems and precious metals and things that aren't in the Middle East. It was growing herbs and spices that don't grow there. So clearly Eden wasn't right there, but where was it? And what the coolest part ever is using cartography, going back to the oldest maps on Earth, they all show the Garden of Eden. I can show you right now the Garden of Eden on almost all of the oldest maps in the world, even going to Christopher Columbus's map that he drew. He drew exactly where Eden was.
Oh, wow. A lot of people don't know that Christopher Columbus was on a bit of a Christian quest himself, as he went out searching the world.
Exactly. And these are all little bits and pieces of the puzzle that when you get it all together and it fits, you're looking at all the evidence and you're just like, this is incredible. This is a real historical event and people. They're not mythical, allegorical stories that are just kind of placed in there for no reason. And when you realize, like, wow, this is good evidence, you would think that other Christians would be the first to be like, amazing, this is like what I need to share with everybody. But they kind of like go, I don't know. It's just my church doesn't teach that they're real people, so I don't really see the point. It's a shame.
Okay, so now, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag on the tree, but you said something else that I found intriguing. You said that God warned Adam that the day he ate from that tree, he would begin aging. What did you mean by that? Where'd you get that?
Well, the Hebrew text says, I believe it's like muah. It's a Hebrew word for in death you shall die. And what that is when they ate from the tree, we translated it as the day you eat of it, you will die. But they didn't die that day. So what's going on? Well, when you look at the original translation, it doesn't say that you'll die immediately. It says that you will begin dying. So what happened is they were kicked away from the tree of life, which was granting them immortality, and they ate from the tree that caused them to sin, and therefore now aging was introduced into the body, and they started accumulating mutations, and they started aging biologically, and their maximum genetic lifespan was about 1,000 years. That's why the patriarchs live around 930 to 960, and then after the flood, it's a dramatic drop in lifespan. So something caused them to start aging, and it was from eating that tree that sin was introduced, and they were now exiled from the tree of life that was in the Garden of Eden.
I think the Hebrew phrase there is mot to moot.
That's it. Okay.
And the English translation, in the day that thou eat of it, thou shalt surely die. In the day doesn't imply necessarily it had to be that day. The implication can easily be taken that meant in the day that you do that, you're going to begin this process of dying. Rest assured, that's the day that the die has been cast and your death is imminent. And so, interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Now, we can't get out of the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls now, but you talked about cartography. Let's try to jump into some science.
Well, hey, before we do that, guys, I want to bring up something really quick. It's in the same vein. So I was at a Bible study, and one of the guys in the Bible study goes to one of those liberal churches with, what like Matt was talking about. They don't believe in a literal Adam and Eve. But he said he actually believed that the earth was young, 6,000 years, and that there was a literal Adam and Eve. And it was because of a verse in the Bible and not because of science. And I wanted to throw this out. So he was referring to Romans 6:23 and verses like it, where for the wages of sin is death. And so he saw evolution as all this massive amount of death before sin came in the world. But the Bible teaches that death is because of sin. And that he said that was the one thing that convinced him. It wasn't the science or anything else. He doesn't really like the science, but that was another part of the Bible that just points, against this whole idea of evolution. So, all right. So Matt, take it away. Let's hear or Matt or Donnie, whoever wants to present on the genetic evidence.
Yeah, we have lots of scientific evidence we can go over. One of our favorites is that we can actually look at the mutations that accumulate every generation and rewind them backwards in time to the point where you land on no mutation, and that takes us right back to Adam and Eve. And these are called genealogical germline mutation rate studies, or pedigree mutation rate studies. And they're in all of the published peer-reviewed literature. So when they say, it's just creationist content, that is completely untrue.
False.
And Donnie and I love to go through those papers and show them directly from the literature. No, these mutation rates from these secular scientists take us right back to the biblical timeline. And when they say, sure, whatever, that's just one person. That can happen. That's the most recent common ancestor doesn't mean the first one. But now you have to explain why every animal also has the same mutation rate and also goes back to the biblical timeline of Noah's flood. Good luck trying to do that one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about mitochondrial Eve. A study by Ann Gibbons, and when they looked at the mitochondrial clock, and they ended up getting much more data. I think the Romanov family in Russia, they had more DNA data. And so she says in a science article, a Science magazine article, that mitochondrial Eve would be a mere 6,000 years old. 6,000 years old. And then, of course, her very next sentence was, well, that can't be the case. And right. What they ended up doing was they ended up mixing chimp DNA with human DNA to get the dates around 200,000 years.
Right.
A totally circular, bogus argument. They assume evolution is true. So we're related to chimps. So let's do this comparison again, or let's do this clock again. And with the assumption that we're related to chimps, look what happens. It's 200,000 years instead of 6,000.
I'd like to cover something briefly, gentlemen, that I think will be fascinating to your audience. And perhaps Matt can expand on the significance of the observed mutation rate and how we can get these mutation rates from what's called pedigree studies, where we look at, for example, grandparents, parents, and kids. So if it's the mitochondrial DNA, you can look at grandmothers, mothers, daughters, count up the differences, and what you get is a fast rate. And the same thing is true for the Y chromosome. The rate is very fast, about 1 to 3 per generation. What the significance is for the origin of Adam and Eve, how far they go back, we can have Matt touch on. But here is some fascinating evidence that supports what Genesis 9:19 says. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. Well, right here is a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. What you can do, and specifically Dr. Nathaniel Jensen of AIG did this. He took mitochondrial DNA worldwide and he compared them in a phylogenetic tree like this. Mitochondrial DNA, it's what's called uniparentally inherited DNA, so it's only passed down on one side, specifically the mother's side. It's outside of the nucleus. It's a smaller DNA compartment. It's about 16,500 letters long. It's involved in energy production. And we've been able to trace back all worldwide mitochondrial DNA to a single woman. But in terms of this phylogenetic tree, Amazingly, what you'll notice is right in the middle, you see these 3 arrows. You've got 3 nodes. So what does the Bible say in Genesis 9:19? Well, the earth was overspread by 3 reproducing couples, right? You have the flood bottleneck, and you have Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives. Those would be the daughters-in-law of Noah. Now, we just learned that mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally. So if what the Bible says, again in Genesis 9:19, if that's true, then in the mitochondrial DNA, we should be able to trace back all mitochondrial DNA to 3 main starting points. And in technical terms, what these are, the evolutionary community doesn't even contest this. These are the L, M, and N haplogroups, these 3 major nodes. And so on this tree, this is a phylogenetic tree, these lines, they represent DNA differences or mutations. And the line separating, this is very interesting. The line separating these 3 major nodes, they're short. Okay, so if the lines are mutations, that means these women here are only separated by a few mutations, less than 10 easily. The lines radiating out, as you can see, they're very long, a lot longer than the lines separating L, M, and N. That means more time, more mutations, more diversity. So what is this tree representing? Well, I think it's amazing. You've got pre-flood mutations here, the 3 women that came off of the ark, specifically Shem, Ham, and Japheth's wives, and radiating out from them are post-flood mutations, post-flood people, post-flood individuals and people groups. And so amazingly, we can trace back mitochondrial DNA to 3 major haplogroups. The Bible says that we've all come from 3 reproducing couples. To the evolutionists, this has to be a coincidence. But to the biblical creationists like us 3, this is amazing confirmation of what Genesis says about human origins.
Amen. Good stuff.
Yeah, so everything's tracing back to 3 women. So how many women were on the ark?
Yeah, well, technically on the ark, good question. You have 4, Noah's wife. So assuming that Noah and his wife didn't have any more daughters, then the 3 founding couples basically would be Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their 3 wives.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we throw in an interesting aside. What do you say, Doug?
Oh, no. I don't know, Fred. I don't know if that's necessary. Is that really necessary at this point?
I wonder if
that
it
could
is,
be fun.
only because Dominic Enyart did a short on this topic. And so not on this, what we're talking about here, Donnie and Matt, but it's on the 3 daughters of Eve that I think that was the name of the paper that Dr. Rob Carter did originally on this, which was fantastic. We totally agreed. This is huge evidence for the Bible. But something that Bob, some research he had did that I just want to mention. It'll take about a minute. And when I say a minute, because I want to play a 1-minute short that Dominic Enyart did on this.
Yeah, that's great.
And so you had the 4 women on the ark. And so it gets to the question of the reason that Canaan was cursed. Are you guys familiar with this?
Yeah, Fred, I think you and I briefly discussed this in our program together, actually on Standing for Truth. So if it's what I'm thinking, then yes, this is an interesting point.
There could be a blurring of one of those 3 lines, and it seems like the science partially supports that. So I'm going to play this short real quick, this short from Dominic Enyart from Enyart Theology real quick. It's about a minute long, and I think it's a good thing to show you guys.
Why was Canaan cursed? Genesis chapter 9 records the story of Noah's son Ham. Remember, Noah was the guy with the ark in the global flood. And Moses records, quote, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. As a result of this, Noah cursed Ham's son, Canaan. Canaan then became the head of Israel's primary enemies, the Canaanites. Needless to say, this story is bizarre. Why would Noah curse Ham's son because Ham looked at his nakedness? Well, it's not immediately clear, so it deserves some research. This phrase has caused much confusion, but when Christians learn its meaning, the entire chapter tells a much clearer yet unfortunate story. You see, quote unquote, a man's nakedness is an ancient Hebrew figure of speech. Essentially, it's a polite way of referring to sexual intercourse with a man's wife.
I've actually heard that before. And one thing I can add to that is that maybe that was in the Bible why Noah was never, again, mentioned talking to his wife before. So that.
Well, interesting. Yeah. So for those who, just to make sure the audience knows what we're talking about, if this account, as Dominic Enyart explained it, is correct, which I thoroughly believe it is. I mean, it's very well documented in the Bible as this figure of speech. What it means is that Ham slept with his mom and produced Canaan.
That's disgusting.
And so we've believed that there actually is a blurring of these three lines that came from, you know, the daughters of Eve, so to speak, that there's maybe three or four.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to bring this up.
Well, and our haplogroup right here, some have argued, one could say there's some in-house debate on how to interpret this phylogenetic tree. If there was a third line from Noah's family, then this haplogroup here, R, could also represent one of those women. So you'd have 3, possibly 4. And so regardless of what view or hypothesis is true, what do we have? We still have confirmation of what the Bible is saying, because you've got 3, 4 max. Some have argued that this represents a post-Babel dispersal event, which is interesting as well. But like you said, and then also Dominic, that if there's a fourth lineage, that fourth lineage could be here, R. Now the line separating L, M, and N when you bring in R is a little longer, so we'd have to interpret that, but still not as long as your other lines, which again is representing DNA differences or mutations over time. And so one could interpret the tree with that view. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and the bottom line, even though we don't have all the facts yet, although I do believe genetic science will advance to the point one day to catch up with the Bible and help explain the Bible. And I'm excited to see that happen and appreciate the work that you guys have done already. But before we go on, I just want to thank Dominic Enyart, Fred, because when you said it was time for an interesting aside, I thought you were going to hit me with the interesting fact of the week, and I thought I had made it, at least through the radio broadcast, without being embarrassed by the interesting fact of the week, and we should probably move on to another topic right now.
So you don't think we should do the interesting fact? I think we should. I think this is the perfect spot for it. So, Doug, are you ready for the interesting fact of the week? And this one's a little bit of a softball. I think you can get this one, but it could stump you because just being under pressure. And then if it does, we'll give Donnie and Matt a shot.
All right.
All right, so here is the interesting fact of the week. Which part of the human body is named after the first man in the Bible?
Oh. Let's see, the first man in the Bible being Adam, created from the dust of the ground. Oh, yeah, the Adam's apple.
Let's do it again.
Hey, there you go, Doug.
You got it.
Yes! So Donnie and
Makes
Matt,
sense after you hear it.
Donnie and Matt, just so you know, whenever we have more than 2 guests, Bob always gives me a softball because he's. I'm sorry, did I say Bob?
Yeah.
Anyway, Fred always gives me a softball because he's merciful and he tries to be generous, especially in large groups of people.
He's a merciful host.
Yeah,
that's
We
right.
appreciate that about you, Fred. Okay, so what does the Bible demand? Earlier we read that the Bible is clear. God creates 2 people. Adam, Eve, Adam the first man, Eve the mother of all living. They're unrelated to any other form of life. That includes chimpanzees, our so-called closest cousin. on the evolutionary phylogenetic tree of life, and banana plants. Well, the Bible demanded a single woman that every human being has descended from. The evolutionary model did not predict this. If evolution were true, we did not have to originate from a single man and a single woman. As a matter of fact, if we went into detail on the out of Africa theory, we would have every reason to believe there should have been multiple mitochondrial DNA lineages, multiple Y chromosome lineages. But again, take every single male Y chromosome, that's the paternally inherited DNA compartment, passed down on the father's side. I have my father's Y chromosome. And there's very little variation. Every single male Y chromosome is nearly identical in its genetic makeup, can be traced back to a single man. Same thing with the mitochondrial DNA. They're both very different from chimpanzee. For example, if you consider overall size differences, gene content, and architecture, the chimpanzee and human Y chromosomes are less than 30% the same. They're nothing alike. But the Bible demanded a single woman, a single man, and we've discovered this single woman and single man, Eve, and specifically when it comes to the Y chromosome Noah. Now, Matt, I want you to take it from here. Mutation rates. In the scientific literature, the conventional literature, this is the evolutionary, this is their Bible in many ways. They admit that the observed mutation rate is much faster than the so-called phylogenetic rate that evolutionists look to. As you can see here from this paper, tenfold the observed mutation rate, tenfold higher than phylogenetically derived rates. This is the Parsons paper. Matt, what is the significance of this specific paper, but also other papers related to the mutation rate in mitochondrial DNA? What does that tell us about the origin of Eve and mankind in general?
This was one of the largest studies that was ever done at its time, the first one, because Parsons worked for the FBI, and he gathered 10 of the best geneticists from around the world and got them together and said, let's run a mutation rate and a substitution rate. Substitution rate is just a worldwide population version. And let's determine when the first woman can converge from this. How long ago did she actually live? The most recent common ancestor of all women alive today. And as you can see from this, the mutation rate he got was about 20 times higher than expected. Really, really fast, and put the Eve living about 6,500 years ago. And the critics didn't like this. They didn't believe it. And one of his biggest critics named Holland said, I'll run that test again with you. And so the following year, in 1998, he joined the team. They ran the numbers again from a different bunch of blood, all from the FBI database, usually from people that died in war. And they gathered up all the blood, and sure enough, the mutation rate was even faster than the first one. They said, okay, something will explain this later in the future probably. We don't know what that is, but we'll eventually get a slower rate that'll match evolution. Years went by. And in 2022, they ran another pedigree study. This is the most recent one in humans, got the same rate. We will look at what Nathaniel Jensen found, because what he was talking about was the Eve's consensus sequence, which is mitochondrial, that takes us back to the first woman. But he was also talking about the Y chromosome. So when Nathaniel Jensen at Answers in Genesis came along, and he started reading through the published peer-reviewed papers, and the first ones that were done on pedigree mutation rates, they scanned the Y chromosome and didn't see very many mutations. So they said, see, it's really slow. It points back to about 300,000 years ago. And so what happens is two other studies came out. You can see them right here. They were pedigree rate studies as well, but they did something different. They scanned the Y chromosome multiple times, called high sequence data scanning. And what they noticed is they missed hundreds of mutations. And by missing those hundreds of mutations, they actually found that there was actually 3 mutations per person per generation. That's extremely fast. But they hid this. They hid it in the supplemental data. That's why if you find it right here, it says that the difference was about 10-fold faster. That's exactly what Parsons discovered, isn't it? Exactly the same. So they hid this in the supplemental form, and they said, this prompted us to explore additional filters, meaning we didn't like this at all. This does not align with evolution. What did it align with? Well, the observed rate, 3 mutations on average. The average person has 440 mutation differences. So that takes us back only 146 generations before we land around Noah. So depending on the generation time you want to give him, that 30 years takes us back 4,380 years. 35 years takes us back 5,100. That's not evolutionary timeline. That's not 300,000 years. So then Nathaniel Jensen said, I have a better idea. Let's compare this to the Native American history going over from the red record and see if it can align with something. So what he noticed is that Native Americans they track time by something called a sachens. Sachens are how long a Native American chief lives. So it's not a constant number. It can be 15 years and then he dies of a heart attack, or it could be 50 years because he lived his entire age. So he tracked how many sachens it was to that, and it matched his mutation rate. And here's another thing that's cool. Not only did he confirm it with history, he also said, well, how many mutations until we notice that the haplogroups form and they branch out in the Y-chromosome. And sure enough, taking it 3 mutations per generation, you land on Peleg. Exactly where the dispersion happened, in the Tower of Babel. So how cool. And where? It's in the Middle East. Wait a minute. I thought people originated in Africa. How come all the haplogroups formed in the Middle East? In the biblical area? That makes no sense, right? Think about it. People are living 150,000 years in Africa, and a haplogroup just means when you're living in a small group, a mutation will arise, and it'll pass around till everybody in that tribe or population has it. That's a new haplogroup. So Africa, full of people, full of tribes, for hundreds of thousands of years, and all of a sudden the haplogroups only waited to form until they left Africa? Yeah, I don't think so. That's nonsense. But don't worry, we have even more information, because another study said that it looks like science has confirmed that the human genome began to rapidly diverge not more than 5,000 years ago. So wait, if we're living in Africa and we're diverging as people, it should go back hundreds of thousands. We don't see that. Instead, when we look at Africa, we only find a few haplogroups. Not very many at all. But what do we find when we look? We found the structures of Noah's 16 grandchildren. How interesting is that? Literal places with literal people. And if we have time, I can tell you a story about William H. Shea.
Okay, so wait a minute here. Okay, so Matt, you said that everybody goes back, you look at these genealogies and everything traces back to the first pirate, right? Peg leg. Oh, wait, no, you said Peleg. Okay, my bad. So, I digress. So who's this guy you wanted to talk about, Matt?
This was an interesting person that I found when I was looking for physical evidence of biblical patriarchs. This man in the middle is named William H. Shea, and he was got his PhD in Loma Linda, California, and he was an explorer and loved to travel. And what he did is he thought to himself, let's go to the Middle East. Why not? This is some of the first history arose in the Fertile Crescent. So what he did is he traveled up to Turkey and went to Mount Ararat. And while he was there, he was documenting his trip and said, I have a guide to take me around. Show me some of this historical stuff. So after Mount Ararat, he looked around. He saw some interesting things, but nothing that really stood out. So what he did is he went over and said, the tour guide said, I think you're going to like Mount Carey. It's a very interesting place and it's not too far away, just a little bit kind of north from here. So they took him up and he took him to what's called Mount Ararat. And Mount Ararat looks like this on the satellite GPS, by the way. This is Google Earth. And so when they got there, they got out and they looked at the beautiful terrain and he said, let's scout and go up the mountain. And he said, all right, so they did a little tour up to the top of the mountain, and when they came back down, he said, look at this. Look on the top of this mountain over here. I think there's something up there. I kind of see it. And if you zoom in just a little bit, you can see there is something up there. He said, can we go back and look at that? And they said, sure, but we have to travel around. We can hike around it. He said, can't we just do the perimeter of the lake? It'll be a little bit faster. They completely agreed. And on his travel walking around, he noticed on the stones that there was an interesting writing. And because this was a specialty, he said, that's Protosemitic. This is the first writing system of mankind. What's that doing here? This shouldn't be here at all. And he noticed a couple of the letters, and they kept moving. And he said, this is interesting. This kind of is showing me that there's like a map. It's guiding us somewhere. So what he did is they walked along the beach a little bit further, and he came up on a giant rock. It looked like this. And in it, he noticed there were some images. So he traced it, and he drew this. And he noticed it has a dove on one side, a raven on another, with an ark right here with people on it. There's faces, and there's a group of people down here that says Japheth, Shem, and Ham. And so highlighted rock, it's a little bit more like this. You can thank AI for doing that for me. And it was amazing. He found this rock that seemed to portray the exact story of what was going on with the ark. And after he read it, he said the ark landed here. Very interesting. So now he's on to something, and they're not even to their destination yet. So they keep walking, and he goes up, and the top of the mountain is actually tombs. And there's tombs everywhere. But here's the view looking down at the parking lot. It's got a cross on it now, and there's a bunch of piled up rocks. That's a gravesite. And this fascinated him to no end. And one thing that he really couldn't believe is when they started to look at specific rocks. Sorry, that was a little. I moved one. I don't see it right now. It's the most important one of all. Anyway, he came across a stone that had a face of a man on it and a hole in it. And when you look through the hole, it points at the mountain on the other side of the lake. And written on it, it says Noah and tomb. And he was like, I can't believe this. This is amazing. This is unbelievable. So the tour guide said, we actually have one more stop to do. We can come back to this if you like. So they got in their vehicle and they journeyed. He said, I want to show you the Armenian Stonehenge. So they traveled and they got to the Armenian Stonehenge. They got out, and sure enough, he saw the same writing yet again. This is that Protosemitic inscriptions that they find in certain places of the world that's really old. The origin of writing, actually. So they got out and he noticed more writing. And he said, wow, this has Shem and his wife's name on it, including others. There were other people that weren't mentioned in Scripture, but he noticed that their names were also inscribed on these rocks. And something very fascinating, one of the stones has Shem's and his wife's name on it, and right in the middle is a tomb. And on the other side over here, a little off the screen, is another tomb. He literally found Shem's grave and his wife's. And I found it interesting that the other one he didn't get a chance to go back to. He would have actually probably been able to identify Noah's tomb. Now, this fascinated me, and I looked online and I found out his information. He lives over here in Palm Desert, California, by me, and I wanted to go see him. So I found this and I emailed, and unfortunately, his wife responded to me and said he died in 2000. So all of his research and everything she couldn't access because she's 87 years old and couldn't do it. So the best I could get were the stories that I found online. And I found it fascinating that we have physical evidence leading us to these tombs and graves, and never really been investigated much because this guy found it and posted it online, but it's in a different language. So I just really like that story, and I can't believe I can't find my picture.
Well, it's interesting and fascinating stuff, and what it points to. Whether or not it's all genuine, we don't know, but what it does point to is a knowledge of the story going back very far with people in that land, and the fact, it just highlights the fact that every civilization on the planet has some sort of flood story, which also tells us that all those flood stories are derived from something that actually happened, and that's what the Bible tells us. And so I think that's what I'm convinced. Adam and Eve, yeah, real. Absolutely. And I appreciate the fact that there are people working in genetics to try to catch up with Genesis and Matthew and 2 Corinthians. I love it. Eventually they will catch up, and you guys will be there, and hopefully us too, to document as much of it as we can. But now I want to talk about, and we might not have time today, but we'll have you guys back to talk about endogenous retroviruses. I want to hear more about that, because with that many syllables, there's got to be a lot of people in the audience who absolutely want to know, what is that all about?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. I will put up some visuals showing exactly why this argument from, and you said it, you nailed it, endogenous retroviruses. If you were to search on YouTube or Google, what's the best evidence for evolution? What typically comes up is endogenous retroviruses. Now, what endogenous retroviruses are claimed to be are shared viral-like sequences in the biological world. So they'll say, well, humans and chimpanzees share these viral-like sequences that they call ERVs, and therefore they must have inherited those from a common ancestor. So they'll say humans and chimps have a common ancestor going back about 6 million years ago, and there must have been ancient viral infections that were passed on to both lineages. And I like to ask the question, are these sequences, this supposed viral DNA, are they really the ancient remnants of past viral infection, or are they created units of DNA function? Now, I wrote a book called The Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, examining that question and examining this argument in detail. In my book and presentations, I've also formally debated the topic many times with the proponents of evolution. And I've documented dozens and dozens of papers directly in the secular literature showing the amazing functionality of these endogenous retroviruses. They function, and here's just a few, and then I want to go over some of my favorite papers on the issue. And so ERVs are playing an antiviral role in the genome. So in many ways, some of these ERVs are our antiviral programs like you have in a computer. They will fight off exogenous retroviruses. So there's a difference between endogenous, that means it's occurring from within. Exogenous would be like the HIV virus. It's occurring horizontally or externally, external infection. And so these ERVs act to fight off viral infections. And as a matter of fact, to do so, they have to share the sequence similarity with the exogenous retroviruses, because evolutionists will oftentimes argue, they'll challenge us, they'll say, okay, if these ERVs are not really the ancient vestiges of past viral infection, why do they look like retroviruses? The way they're made up, the structure, they're made up with what's called long terminal repeats, LTRs, GAG, POL, and ENV components. It's the same makeup as a retrovirus, but it turns out, gentlemen, that in order for these ERVs, which are created units of DNA function, the majority of them, in order for them to carry out many of their operational roles, they have to look like retroviruses. They also function in determining cell types, regulating gene expression. But here's one of the most amazing functions. Notice this, directly from the conventional literature. This is what they say. HERVs, if there's an H, that's human-specific ERV, appear to play important roles in physiology, fetal development, and of course they got to throw it in there, that's their assumption, human evolution, they say. If the accidental infection, so firstly, you got to be able to read between the lines in these technical papers. If the accidental infection, well, they're assuming that an infection occurred millions of years ago, but let's continue, of a mammalian ancestor by an exogenous retrovirus. So they argue that in the ancient past, our ancestors were infected with exogenous retroviruses, and then those were passed down vertically through the germ cell line and became endogenous retroviruses. But they say if this had never occurred, the placenta and the mammals that produce it, including humans, would have never existed. So what this is saying is that ERVs play important roles in embryological development, that if we did not have these ERVs, we would not exist. Gentlemen, I like to exist. I think you all like to exist. And so the easy answer to the question, why do we share endogenous retroviral-like sequences with the biological world, let's say chimpanzees, is the same reason why all modes of transportation have engines in common. Because you need these DNA units to live, to function, to exist in the first place. A car without an engine is not going to get very far. And we require these DNA elements for embryological development. This paper right here is incredible. This is from 2021. More and more are they finding these functional roles for these ERVs. This one's called Switching Sides, How Endogenous Retroviruses Protect Us from Viral Infections, long disregarded as junk DNA or genomic dark matter. So they once assumed that these were non-functional junk. That's what they're saying. No functions. This is just viral DNA. These are evolutionary leftovers. But is that really the case, gentlemen? The answer is no. They're admitting this right in the conventional literature. They are refuting their best evidence for us. So they say ERVs have turned out to represent important components of the antiviral immune response. Not only do they regulate cell immune activation, but may even directly target invading pathogens. And they have a focus here in recent advances in acting as regulators of antiviral gene expression. That's incredible. Their so-called best evidence for evolution, we're finding function after function that if we did not have these ERVs, we wouldn't survive. So we wouldn't even exist. What's the best explanation? I argue common design, not common design.
Right.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it make more sense to assume that these are common tools, or I shouldn't say tools, I suppose. These are common components taken from the toolbox of the designer to perform certain functions. That certainly seems as reasonable to be pursued as the idea that it was an accidental viral infection. That's almost like saying the viruses designed us. What exactly?
Well, guys, so Donnie, you mentioned the word functional a lot of times. I remember years ago, many years ago, and I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, when I first heard this argument, maybe it was somewhere around there, that they had a little bit of evidence for function, but their big premise was that they didn't have function. That's what I remember. And it was kind of also related to the whole shared mistakes thing, but the ERVs, I remember at the time saying, if we find function, what are you guys going to say? Because they were already finding a little bit. And so now, fast forward another 20 years, and here you are, Donnie, showing the actual scientific literature. The evolutionists themselves are finding this function in these ERVs, and it totally demolishes their argument.
Amen. You nailed it. I mean, there's still many militant evolutionists that believe the majority of the genome is junk, even though that idea has been completely overturned. Junk DNA is junk science. Here we have the ENCODE projects. There's been many sophisticated projects looking at the incredible function of the genome. And notice this, from 2012, these data enabled us to assign biochemical functions for 80% of the genome. Now, what militant evolutionists would say is, well, okay, we have 80% biochemical activity, but the majority of that activity, because they have the evolutionary mindset, the assumptions, they'll say that must be noise or spurious. So it's not really beneficial or functional activity. But I say that doesn't make sense logically or scientifically, because transcription, that's an energy and resource intensive process. Every time you add, Fred, a single nucleotide to a growing RNA chain, what you're consuming is energy. You're utilizing ATP. And so if the majority of this activity really were junk or spurious or just noise and not reflective of true beneficial function, then evolutionary mechanisms over time should have weeded out all of this excess genetic baggage, because it would be what? It would be wasteful of energy and resources for the cell. So the fact that it's still there, this activity is still present, tells us that this activity is beneficial activity. And within this activity, gentlemen, what do we find? We find pseudogenes, these so-called genetic scars or genetic mistakes. We find ERVs. And that suggests that even in the units that we haven't really found the exact function for, there is a function that we have to do more study, more research, and discover exactly what that function is, because we're just in the infancy of understanding the DNA language. But as creationists, we can make testable predictions, can't we? We can predict as the years go on, we're going to discover more and more functional roles for these so-called evolutionary leftovers.
Yeah, and if our audience, many in our audience probably remember going back to, I think, 1997, Bob Enyart was debating Eugenie Scott, and he asked her, what's your best evidence for evolution? Well, she said junk DNA. Mm-hmm. And he goes, well, how much do you think we really know about the genome? Like, do you think it's 5%? Do you think it's 50? Do you think it's 90? And she's like, oh, we know about everything we're going to know. I mean, and you know, now again, you fast forward again, you got guys like Dr. Francis Collins, who ran I think ENCODE, didn't he, guys? He ran that, I know he was the director of the NIH, and he apologized for calling it junk DNA. He came out and he apologized and said, this is not junk DNA. It's pretty much, we think it's probably 100% functional.
I don't think we've been able to get a hold of Eugenie to solicit an apology. Although we wouldn't solicit an apology, we would just hope that she would feel compelled to make an apology. But we have not been able to get a hold of her lately.
Yep.
I bet
well,
not.
To say back then that we know everything that we could ever know about DNA function is flabbergasting. I don't know how anybody could today still hold on to this junk DNA paradigm right in their papers. Gentlemen, I cited this paper earlier about ERVs in 2021. In the paper here, I have an excerpt. Notice what they say. Our knowledge about endogenous retroviral elements involved in cell immune responses is what? Constantly increasing. So do we know everything that we could ever know about DNA function? No. That knowledge is constantly increasing every year. We come out with more and more functions for pseudogenes, ERVs. I have a number of papers in this slideshow going over the functional roles for pseudogenes. They're necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell, but many over the years have said pseudogenes, ERVs, these are really just irrefutable. I heard one evolutionist say that because in science we don't really prove things, it's about disproving things. But he said, I've heard prominent evolutionists say that ERVs are as close as you can get to proof for something. But as we can see, no, ERVs are just yet more confirmation of design.
Yeah, and real quick, Donnie, to be fair to Eugenie Scott and to many of these other scientists, in their actual work, when they're actually doing the work of compiling evidence and analyzing genomics, they won't say that they know everything, and they won't say that it's really proof of anything. It seems to me they only say that in the context of defending evolution. That's right. When they become clowns and not scientists. The rest of the day, they're scientists, but you get them to consider the possibility of a creator, especially a creator who will judge them for their sins and wants to restrain their sexual lasciviousness. That's when they become clownish. Otherwise, they're good scientists.
Well, she's a militant anti-theist. She runs the Freedom From Religion organization that if you wanted to get creationist content taught in schools, she's the first one to sue you as an individual. Mm-hmm. So that explains that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's religion. It's not science, bottom line.
Well, that's why I like to say you find the best rebuttals, gentlemen, to evolutionary arguments like ERVs directly in the secular literature. Because that's when they're doing their science. Yes, in the discussion section or conclusion sections of these papers, they do oftentimes have to put forth rescue devices or rescue mechanisms. Like for ERVs, for example, they'll say, well, these functions were co-opted or evolved over time. My challenge to the evolutionary community is show me a non-functional endogenous retrovirus going from non-functional to something incredibly functional in, let's say, embryological development. Yeah. Actually, and you won't find a paper showing that. As a matter of fact, there's incredible research going on right now. This is one of my favorite new functions that they've discovered, that ERVs are acting as tumor suppressants, in tumor suppression, where transcribed ERVs in the cell give the cell the appearance of being invaded by a harmful exogenous retrovirus in tumor cells. And so the immune system, this whole process is amazingly mediated by what's called the P53 protein. Okay, this is the guardian of the genome, the superhero protein of the genome, many call it. And this whole process is mediated by the P53 protein. The immune system targets that tumor cell with destruction, to destroy it, because it looks like through what's called viral mimicry that cell is being invaded by a virus. And so this is just one of the many functions for the ERV. So when the evolutionists ask, well, why do ERVs look like retroviruses? They have to look like retroviruses to carry out these functional roles, because their function in viral mimicry wouldn't be very effective if they didn't look like the retrovirus that they're trying to mimic. It would be like if I wanted to infiltrate the mob as an FBI agent. Am I going to show up in my FBI uniform? Hey, here I am, name tag and badge and everything. No, I'd have to play the part, right? I'd have to look like a mobster, somebody who's not actually an FBI agent. And that's what a lot of these ERVs are doing as they fight off tumors, as they fight off invading viruses. This is all incredible evidence for common design, not common descent.
Yes, and that's a great analogy. That helps me understand exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, so guys, man, what powerful evidence. I love this whole ERV thing. It's come a long way since I first heard that argument. I can't believe they're still using that as their number one argument, but, so guys, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and going through this stuff. And I know there's so many more topics we could talk about. It's never ending. Donnie and Matt, you guys got a great program going over there. Standing for Truth Ministries. You've had a lot of great guests. I'm looking forward to a lot more and a lot of your live debates and a lot of good live discussions. So we encourage our audience to go subscribe to their channel and tune into their live debates. And you can leave comments. You can comment during the show. You can even, toss in a buck or two and you can get your comment all the way to the top and get read. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, Fred, you experienced that. We had a pretty extensive Q&A, didn't we?
Yeah,
brother, when you joined me.
Cool. Yeah. So, and, we just had a really good show with Pete Moore on special relativity. So maybe you guys can have him on. And, that's to me, that's a really interesting topic too. Very controversial, among creationists too. So.
Oh, that's funny you mentioned that, Fred. I brought that subject up to a professional colleague, college educated, MD level education. And she said, there's more and more people are questioning relativity. And she's not a Christian or anything like that, but she wasn't shocked by it. And so I sent her a link, and I hope to follow up with her on that. And someday, Donnie and Matt, I hope that I'll interact with professional colleagues who'll say, more and more people are they're questioning Darwin. It's just not working anymore. So we all keep doing what we can to, and I love your tactic of taking out of their own words. Like you said, when they're doing their real science is the best time to find the refutations of their clownish evolutionary claims. And I love your tactics, and man, appreciate you guys coming on and sharing it with us and our audience. And where do you go from here? What's next on your agenda? Is there anything big you guys have in the kitty coming down?
It's a great question. We always have active research projects. I mean, endogenous retroviruses are still an active research project, because now I just put out a presentation on the origin of retroviruses in general, just focusing on the bigger picture question. Because I like to ask the evolutionists this, Doug and Fred. Okay, what's the true origin of retroviruses? Because the evolution community, they have what's called a chicken and egg problem. Retroviruses actually require a host to replicate. So what came first, the host or the retrovirus? Well, wait a minute, if you don't have a host or a pre-existing cell, then the retrovirus has no way to replicate. And so I have an active research project investigating that answer. And, I've got some good research suggesting that retroviruses have originated from within genomes after the fall due to degeneration, so on and so forth. So working on that, Matt and I just finished a marathon of a debate with a prominent evolutionist, Culture Cats, on Adam and Eve. So if you want to see, those in the audience, the viewer, if you want to see how an informed evolutionist might respond to some of this evidence, I'd recommend going to watch that debate. We're very happy with the debate. Who made the best arguments? Who made the worst arguments? We'll leave that up to the viewer, of course. And so, yeah.
Well, the fact that you're promoting it, I have a feeling I know who won.
It was
well,
easy.
I'll say this. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
we also have something called Truth in Research, where we now do publish papers. And I just submitted 3 for Donnie to go through. One of them is the spreading of the seafloor and how the actual ages from radiometric dating prove biblical young Earth creation time, not the evolutionary timeline that they say, hundreds of millions of years, from the published peer-reviewed literature. That's where I found it. They hit it yet again. Surprise, surprise. So a lot of papers coming out as well. We're always busy.
Yeah.
Hydroplate theory conference next month. Fred, you're going to be part of that. So that's our next big conference. We do try to do a conference or seminar every couple months. And so I am excited for that. Matt's going to be co-hosting that with me. We're going to have a rigorous discussion. Fred's going to be present, Brian Lauer. So there's an event to look forward to in our future.
Outstanding. Well, we'll put a link up to all your stuff, gentlemen. Thank you so much. God bless your efforts. Godspeed. And we really appreciate it.
All right.
God bless. It was a privilege.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Again, Standing for Truth Ministries. You definitely got to go check their channel out. Please subscribe to them. And they've got, again, some great debates and a lot of good content. So for Donnie and Matt of Standing for Truth Ministries, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. And also, I almost forgot my co-host, Doug McBurney. So Doug is in his new digs. Check out his new studio, everybody.
Yeah.
He's in his new studio finally after a long process. But that's what happens when you live in California, right, Doug?
That's right. They put you through the ringer every which way, but we managed to outsmart them, and we actually put up a warehouse and studios and global headquarters. Yes, we'll be inviting people down to visit the headquarters soon. Thanks, Fred.
All righty. Thanks again, guys. May God bless you.
Thank you.
Take care.